It's 1800 GMT, and we begin this news hour with the European citizens that are being flown home from Niger following the coup there last week. The French government is currently evacuating, organising hundreds of passport holders to leave the country. The operation began after attacks on the French embassy in the capital Niamey and the closure of Niger's borders just days after the President Mohamed Bazoum was deposed in a coup. Victoria Gatenby begins our coverage.
At an airport in the capital Niamey, the first French citizens arrive ahead of their evacuation flights home. Many Nigerians say they're pleased French people are leaving the country.
As an African, I can say that all the problems that Africans are experiencing in Niger and in Africa, it's France that's at the root of our suffering. We've seen the example of Mali and Burkina Faso, so we too are going to follow in their footsteps. All France has to do is to leave.
Diplomats in Paris have been working around the clock to evacuate citizens from Niger after President Mohamed Bazoum was deposed last week. Niger is one of the world's poorest countries and relies heavily on financial support from Western backers and the regional bloc ECOWAS. Most of that aid has been frozen because of the coup. The military rulers in neighbouring Mali and Burkina Faso have criticised the funding freeze, saying the poorest will be hit hardest. French troops were ordered to leave Mali recently.
We refuse to apply these illegal, illegitimate and inhumane sanctions against the people of Niger. We warn that any military intervention against Niger will be considered as a declaration of war against Burkina Faso and Mali.
Before the coup, Niger was an important ally of the West in the fight against armed groups linked to Al-Qaeda in the Sahel. It's also one of the world's biggest producers of uranium, which fuels nuclear power stations. Niger produced more than 2,000 tons of high-grade uranium last year. That's 5% of global output. France is heavily reliant on nuclear energy. Niger supplies an estimated 15% of uranium for French nuclear power stations. The French government says that it has 2 years' worth of uranium stocks. Some analysts say Western powers are only interested in Niger's natural resources.
It's very worrisome, and I think all Africans must be very worried or concerned that France is making itself, or has made itself, a former colonial power, a kingmaker in Africa, and chooses to protect its interest, even if that means removing African leaders.
The leaders of the coup have announced the suspension of uranium exports to France and other European countries and are warning the West and ECOWAS not to order a military intervention. Victoria Gatenby, Al Jazeera.
An advisor to the deposed president has been speaking to Al Jazeera. Iro Sani says the ousted government would support military intervention by ECOWAS to reinstate the president, but denies allegations they're discussing military action with France. He spoke to my colleague Sami Zaidan via WhatsApp.
A peaceful resolution of this conflict is all what everyone is hoping in this country, and nobody really wishes to see a bloodshed or really a violent conflict bursting in our country. But all depends on the junta who seized the power by force and is holding in hostage our president and is using violence to attack our people who are trying to demonstrate their disapprobation of what they are doing, and that who are showing that they don't agree with the coup. There's violence that's going on. Many of our political members are under arrest. This is the violence that they are using. So we wish that the violence may not burst into our country, but the behavior of the junta who seized the power is leading to violence in this country.
Do you support military intervention of any kind to try and reinstate the president?
In the protocol of the ECOWAS, there is the possibility of using violence against any power that is trying to use violence to seize the power in an ECOWAS country. So it's not a matter of if we support or not, but we are saying that if ECOWAS try to use violence, it is not illegal, because there are these protocols that are in the ECOWAS amendment. So we cannot be against ECOWAS, because we are a member of the ECOWAS, and anything that ECOWAS decides to do is okay for us, because we are members and we support the ECOWAS authorities.
Have you been in touch with the French about French military intervention?
We have not been in touch with French about their intervention, their military intervention. And we are not in touch with France concerning their intervention in the military. French is in contact with one of our leaders who is trying to negotiate with the junta. That's all we know, and that's all I know, but we don't have any connection with the French about their military intervention.
All right, let's bring in Iro Sani, who's the head of the Sahel program at the German peace organisation, the Konrad Adenauer Foundation. He joins us live from Bamako. A very warm welcome to you, sir. The regional bloc ECOWAS, as we heard there, the Economic Community of West African States, have told the coup leaders point blank, reinstate the democratically elected president or run the risk of force. How seriously should we take that threat?
I think it's an empty threat. I mean, if you want to intervene militarily, you need someone supporting you on the ground. But Mr. Bazoum has been under house arrest, for almost a week now, and no army unit has come to his rescue. So it's unlikely that a military intervention force, would work. You have to fly in a plane full of soldiers, and then make your way to the presidential palace without any support on the ground. I mean, ECOWAS has intervened before, 2017 in Gambia, but then they were really invited by the government, but that's not the case here.
I mean, the consequence of a military intervention could mean a pretty serious showdown. Are you suggesting that's extremely unlikely to happen?
Yeah, I mean, the stakes are high. I mean, ECOWAS basically made this threat now, but they're unlikely to follow up. And I think this threat has made also, the putschists, has hardened their stance really to stay, in power. And they will use this to mobilize the street this week again to, frame, Bazoum as someone being, played too cozy with the foreigners who now want to rescue him.
How wary, given all the other options, the other levers that ECOWAS and indeed Western powers could pull, how wary should we be about the decision by several powers to halt aid to the country, a country where, of course, 40% of the population depends upon foreign help?
Yeah, it's really worrisome. But also the example of Mali or Burkina Faso, shows us where also aid was suspended, that didn't stop military governments from doing what they want to do. Sanctions always, or suspension of aid always hits the wrong people, but it rarely really affects decision makers you're trying to target.
Now, we've been looking at pictures over the past few hours of foreign nationals packing up their belongings and fleeing the country, gathering at the airport. Of course, for many Nigerians, they have very few choices for them. If things become more volatile, are we looking at a potential refugee crisis here?
Well, I think the Western countries are trying to get their citizens out as, hopes are fading of some kind of, the coup being reversed. And they don't want to have the same situation like in Sudan, where they really struggle to airlift people. For African countries, it's difficult. Like Nigerians going to flying to other countries. I mean, the road is out of the capital is dangerous anyway. But yeah, definitely more Nigerians will seek, shelter abroad, if only to seek work, because now, there are fewer opportunities with this, crisis, NGOs packing up and less aid. So there will be more migrant movements towards neighboring countries for sure.
And when you say neighboring countries, of course, we're talking about Libya, to the north, aren't we? And, of course, the southern European states have struggled with refugees clearly desperately trying to make the crossing across the Mediterranean and dying in the process.
Yeah, absolutely. In Niger, I mean, the previous government was this kind of stopgap of the migration route from Niger via Libya to the coast. And, that was why Europe in the first place was interested in, working with Niger, not so much security, jihadists, this is a local issue, but they really wanted to close the main migration route from Niger to Libya. And now Europe is in a very vulnerable position because, this decision to close the route was very unpopular. Many people lost jobs in Niger, not just smugglers, also people who own hotels, drivers, restaurants were accommodating, migrants. So there's really no pressure on the new government to, from locals in Agadez in the north to reopen the route to Libya. And this is, that will be a huge challenge for Europe, where right-wing parties now on the rise because of growing migration.
And before you go, I just want your sense on how genuine you think this apparent anti-French and pro-Russian sentiment is. Obviously, we've seen a lot of flag waving on our screens in Niamey, in the capital. Clearly, the optics of all of this matters right now. But in the early hours after the coup, there were initially lots of people on the streets out defending the ousted president. So what's going on here?
I mean, there has been always lingering anti-French sentiment, like in other Sahelian countries, like Mali and Niger, even Chad, because the French are just unpopular for many reasons, most importantly being the former colonial power. Yes, there was on the first day some small protest, which was basically gunned down. And now the supporters of Bazoum are staying indoors, while those with the loudest voices and willing to carry Russian flags, they're going to the street. If you look at the demonstrations, the pictures, you often see the Russian flag is turned upside down. That's because basically these flags are distributed to people, who don't know Russia anyway, but are willing to, don't like France. So they see it, have this illusion that Russia is something better than France, and then they're waving the Russian flag. But, well, I mean, it's not a real pro-Russia sentiment. It's just groups supporting the junta who are now basically exploiting, the anger and by distributing Russian flags and, supporting the military government.
It's a very fluid and extremely unpredictable situation there in Niger at the moment. Ulf Lessing from the Konrad Adenauer Foundation. Many thanks.